we just wanted to get your perspective on how Pakistan has stepped into this role as a mediator for a ceasefire in this war, when until just a few hours ago, Trump was claiming to end a whole civilization. So how is this being perceived on a global stage?
Well, as Trump called it himself, it's a complete and total victory. I think that it's a victory for Pakistan for lots of reasons. First, because of the role that Pakistan played in mediating the talks and coming together to bring about a negotiation between Iran and the United States. But second, it's a complete and total victory for Pakistan because Pakistan's own energy dependency on the Gulf is acute. So 99% of LNG imports for Pakistan come from the Gulf, and a vast proportion of its oil too. So it's not just Pakistan helping the rest of the world out of the goodness of its own heart, although this has been a hugely traumatic event these last 6 weeks for everybody in the world. But Pakistan needs a solution too. And so I think we're all very grateful of the role played by the Prime Minister and the Army Chief in helping common sense prevail, because as we came towards the deadline last night, the alternatives looked pretty desperate, if not catastrophic. So thank goodness that we woke up this morning in a world that's still turning.
Right. And then, of course, there's still some questions looming about whether the ceasefire will hold because Israel continues with its aggression against Lebanon. But as of now, even in Islamabad, we're all prepared to host talks this Friday. So how do you understand, this time between now and when the talks will actually happen? Do you think that it's hard to say, but I'd just like to understand how you perceive the situation.
Well, never celebrate until the end of the innings, until the end of the match. So we look better today than we did yesterday. But in the last half an hour, we've had reports of Saudi pipelines being attacked. By whom? It's not clear. There are lots of people who've got all sorts of reasons to want to push the peace settlements into the long grass. So we'll have to see, but I think there's a lot that still remains to be done. We've done is buy 2 weeks of a ceasefire. We need to see if ships start to get through Hormuz. First of all, there's a big backlog that's going to take a long time to clear. Pakistan, as well as importing a lot of oil and gas, doesn't have a great deal of refinery or storage capacity. So this needs to be a long-term settlement, and a lot will depend on whether Iran and the United States will be able to see eye to eye. Now, if you ask me, it looks to me that there's lots of reasons to be hopeful. But on the other hand, if you ask me, there's a reason why the whole region has been in flames since the 28th of February. So, I think we need to hope these talks in Islamabad are constructive and they're long term. And that requires real clarity of thought on all sides. And the more that intermediaries like Pakistan could do to help smooth some of the ripples, the better. Luckily, I've been to Islamabad many times, so I know what a beautiful city it is, what a great setting to have peace talks. But wouldn't it be great if the Islamabad Accords is the way in which the whole world hears the name of this beautiful city?
Right. And so 2 things have stood out since this morning. First is that Trump has paused bombing on Iran, and the second that Iran has agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz. How significant do you think these developments are, especially the opening of the strait?
Well, the strait is an international body of water, so it's not something that has unilateral ability to be closed. Iran said last night that it's going to be allow access through the cooperation of the Iranian armed forces. That suggests that Iran is expecting some form of toll to be paid by ships that pass through. I suppose that's capitalism on the one hand, but there are international laws governing the rulers of the sea, UNCLOS it's called, the Convention for the Law of the Sea, and it requires all signatories to adhere to and maintain and respect international law. So, like in every country on earth, the governments keep power by administering justice and by having clear guidelines that their citizens and that they as countries follow. So I think we're in a different world where states behave unilaterally. If this is a case of a charge that gets done for the next couple of weeks to make sure that people's minds are concentrated, that's very different to allowing free passage on the open waters. Because, of course, any toll that's charged means that the price of energy in Quetta, Karachi, Islamabad is higher. And, of course, you don't need a historian to point out that when there are compressions on price, the people who suffer most are the people who are poor. So this is disproportionately painful for people in the world who are already the least privileged. And these big discussions between global powers need to put them first, the global majority, who aren't able to cope with price rises that have been very spectacular in the last 6 weeks.
You've done a lot of work on connectivity and the Silk Road. So, from a historical perspective, how do you think Pakistan's role fits into this crisis in terms of like emerging geopolitical corridors and influence?
Corridors are great when everybody's peaceful. They're access points for vulnerabilities when things aren't. So all those networks that carry goods and trade, turns out that those carry coronaviruses very quickly. So they carry pandemics many times in the past. I think the challenge is for a country like Pakistan is how you have diversified economies to make sure that you learn from the vulnerabilities that this poses. So, for example, Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't have a single oil pipeline bringing fuel from the Middle East. Everything comes by sea. So that means that the control of Hormuz, or its ability to close, has the whole impact of every single person living in Pakistan, their ability to cook a meal, to turn on their laptop, or to be able to make a phone call. So, I think that requires thinking about renewables. It requires thinking about how does Pakistan have a protection against not just shocks from Iran, but also all other kinds of benchmark shocks. And, I know I love Pakistan hugely, but you have a tricky neighborhood with Iran on one side, complicated relations with India that go back many, many decades. China, because of CPEC, is perhaps a closer ally in Pakistan than perhaps many Pakistan are comfortable with, and then Afghanistan too in the north. So it's a tricky place to work things out. But luckily, Pakistan is extremely clever. But to be able to have this lesson, I think, of what happens when you have vulnerabilities exposed. That those corridors are great on a sunny day when everybody's peaceful and prosperous. But when there are compressions, they're called choke points. And those don't just happen overseas. That's a lot of people talking about that at the moment. If you're able to cut off people's access to roads, to trade, to goods, to food, then you are able to put them in a position of pain. And that has taken a lot of people by surprise in the last couple of months, just how vulnerable the global economy is to what's happening in the Middle East and Hormuz. But we should learn some very important lessons from this.
Right. And, as you've mentioned that there are certain areas that put Pakistan in an advantageous position, but at the same time, there's things that it needs to be careful of as well. And maybe that's the reason why people were casting doubts over Pakistan's ability to even mediate this ceasefire. But do you think that now that both sides have acknowledged Pakistan's role and we're set to host talks on Friday, that this strengthens Pakistan's case as a credible mediator? And if the talks do succeed, what do you think this will mean for Pakistan's international image?
Look, I think those are all great questions, and because it pays to be positive. In the Bible we say, "Blessed are the peacemakers." People who are able to mediate between two opposing sides and prevent the loss of life, and prevent the difficulties of people becoming even more poor. It's really important that Pakistan plays this role. I think there'll be a great deal of respect. That neighborhood doesn't change with a settlement in Hormuz. The structural problems that Pakistan has to work out and deal with remain. And the challenge of all good governments is to think in the long term about how to increase your opportunities. And Pakistan is a young population, hugely vibrant culture. I'm sorry the cricket team didn't do quite as well as it could have done in the last World Cup. But the people in Pakistan are the joy and the jewels of of your country. There are so many young, clever, interesting, engaged people. Providing opportunities for those is important. So what everybody does when they can see peace being made, we respect people who are able to do that. We gain confidence and credibility. But Pakistan doesn't need to play a global role. It needs to get its problems and its opportunities right in its own backyard. It's great to be loved by other people, but everybody is well disposed towards Pakistan and its people and its rich culture. So I don't think there's a way in which this changes how people see your country. I know I've been to Pakistan so many times. People feel very defensive, saying we want to be loved all over the world. Everybody, I think, is well disposed, but it's very important that these talks reflect well on the leadership in Pakistan, that they reflect on the architecture of Asia as a continent, because the people who are suffering most as a result are, of course, Pakistan, also Bangladesh, India, but economies in Asia much more affected than in Europe, and of course Africa too. So if Pakistan has a vision for the future of how it can build on the Pakistan Accords and show that leadership role in other areas, for example, around clean water, around water problems of the future, around air pollution, around climate change, then that's what leadership looks like. You don't get to do it once. You need to do it on a regular basis. And I'm very hopeful that the government in Pakistan, as in all the neighbouring countries, will be invested wholly in trying to think about what lessons to learn from what we've seen these last couple of months.
Great. Thank you so much. That answers all of my questions.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.